Johnstown, Pennsylvania, was a bustling city in the late 1800s, a symbol of industrial and economic growth. The town's population of 21,000 was predominantly made up of German and Irish immigrants who came to build the railroads. At the time, the city was a transportation hub for the Pennsylvania Railroad Company and was home to the largest steel producer in the United States, the Cambria Iron Company. However, on May 31st, 1889, the South Fork Dam collapsed, leading to the most disastrous flood in American history. The Johnstown flood is emblematic of the tension that exists between rights and responsibilities. In this case, the rights of property owners came into conflict with their civic and ethical responsibilities to protect the lives of other citizens. There were many factors that caused the South Fork Dam to collapse, leading to the tragic flooding of Johnstown. The dam was originally built as the Conemaugh Reservoir for the Pennsylvania Mainline Canal System. In 1857, the Pennsylvania Railroad Company took control of the dam but failed to provide maintenance, so it became weak, leading to a minor break in 1862. Nobody died, and the property damage was minimal. In 1875, John Riley purchased the dam. During the period of Riley's ownership, the copper piping used for drainage of the dam was removed, furthering the dam's disrepair. In 1879, Riley sold the dam to Benjamin Ruff, who bought the property on behalf of the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club. The club was comprised of the wealthy elite of Pittsburgh, including industrialists such as Andrew Carnegie, Andrew Mellon, and Henry Clay Frick. The club was the retreat from the polluted city, a mere 2-hour train ride from Pittsburgh. In total, the club owned 425 acres of land, including the man-made Lake Conemaugh, formerly known as the Conemaugh Reservoir. Around 1880, the South Fork Club lowered the dam so that 2 horse carriages could cross simultaneously. That same year, John Fulton, an engineer from the Cambria Iron Company, inspected the South Fork Dam. He found that after the lowering, the top of the dam was dangerously close to the spillway. This very poorly constructed and maintained dam now had an estimated 20 million tons of water, a disaster waiting to happen.
By the morning of May 31st, 1889, a rainstorm had been battering the Allegheny Mountains for days, raising the water level of Lake Conemaugh by 10 inches an hour. The South Fork Club sent a message to Johnstown around noon, warning them of possible danger.
South Fork Dam is liable to break. Notify the people of Johnstown to prepare for the worst.
The Johnstown Telegram Office ignored the warning because similar telegrams had been sent before without any consequences. At 1:52, another message was sent.
Water is overflowing the dam.
The third and final telegram came at 2:45.
The dam is about to fail.
The warnings were all ignored, and at 3:10, the dam holding back Lake Conemaugh collapsed, releasing 20 million tons of water into the valley. A monstrous wall of water rushed down the valley towards Johnstown, uprooting and demolishing everything in its path. South Fork was the first town the flood reached. Most of the citizens were able to escape, but 4 were killed and 30 houses were washed away. After destroying the small town of South Fork, the floodwaters smashed into the Conemaugh Viaduct, an 80-foot-tall railroad bridge, which quickly gave way. The next town in the flood's way was Mineral Point. The flood destroyed almost everything in its path, killing 16 people. In East Conemaugh, 50 people were killed. The flood then rampaged through Woodvale, home to a wire and steel factory. The flood picked up barbed wire and several locomotives, killing over 300 Woodvale residents. At 4:07, almost an hour after the dam burst, the massive flood struck Johnstown, with water reaching almost 40 miles per hour and heights reaching 35 feet. Buildings, whether brick or timber, disintegrated, and many townspeople were literally torn to pieces by the violence of the flood and its debris. Ultimately, 4 square miles of the city were completely demolished, with property damage estimated at $425 million today. The flood killed 2,209 people. Victor Heiser, a survivor, wrote,
Nobody seemed particularly concerned at the time over the dam. When it had first been constructed, there had been some apprehension, but the dam had never burst, and with the passage of time, the townspeople grew calloused to the possibility of danger. Sometime they thought the dam would give way, but it won't ever happen to us.
After the disaster, the club and its members were not held liable in legal battles. Nathan Kuzer, historian and park ranger at the Johnstown Flood National Memorial.
All of the lawsuits that were filed against the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club and or its members were unsuccessful. The club was defended by the Pittsburgh law firm of Knox and Reed. Both attorneys, Philander Knox and James Hay Reed, were also members of the club. They were pretty powerful Pittsburgh attorneys. I mean, they were probably two of the best attorneys in the country at the time. And so the club was in a pretty good position to get off scot-free.
Besides having powerful attorneys and wealth, the club was legally immune since no law restricted them from altering the dam, even if such alterations could put others in danger, because the rights of property owners were considered absolute. This view of property rights and responsibilities was not universal. In 1868, a British court ruling, Rylance v. Fletcher, held property owners liable for everything on their property, no matter their intent. Pennsylvania was one of the first states to adopt Rylance, but repealed it in 1886 because it was driving business out of the state. By 1889, the aftermath of the flood exposed the consequences of repealing the law and led to many state courts adopting or readopting Rylance, including Pennsylvania. Had Rylance been the standard at the time of the flood, lawsuits against the South Fork Club could have been successful, as the club would have been legally responsible for the dam. The absence of legal responsibility should not have absolved the South Fork Club's moral and civic responsibility to the public. While they had neglected the dam for years, they had received multiple warnings about the dam's condition. John Fulton, the engineer from the Cambria Iron Company who inspected the dam, had given members of the club ample warning about its condition. He was quoted weeks after the flood, saying,
I hold in my possession today my own report made years ago, in which I told these people that their dam was dangerous. I told them that the dam would break sometime and cause just such a disaster as this.
The flood was the largest news story since Lincoln's assassination almost 30 years before. In the months following, flood engineers, newspaper editors, citizens of Johnstown, and people across the country gave their views on the cause of the flood. Most of them placed the blame on the prominent and wealthy members of the South Fork Club, while the telegraph company's failure to relay any of the flood warning messages from the club was largely forgotten. Newspapers also blamed the club for the destruction of the town. Harrisburg News reporter J.J. McLaurin wrote,
50,000 lives in Pennsylvania were jeopardized for 8 years, so that a club of rich pleasure seekers might fish and sail and revel in luxurious ease during the heated term.
Author and historian David McCullough wrote,
The lesson from the Johnstown flood is the danger of assuming that just because someone is in a position of responsibility, they are necessarily behaving responsibly.
After the flood, Pennsylvania established the first known dam regulations in the country. These laws regarded ownership rights and responsibilities. Led by Clara Barton, the Red Cross provided medical assistance and emergency shelter by setting up Red Cross hotels for people to stay in while their homes were being rebuilt. About half the members of the club made donations to Johnstown. Henry Clay Frick gave today's equivalent of over $120,000. The largest donor was Andrew Carnegie, who donated $1.4 million. While these donations helped Johnstown recover from the monstrous flood, Frick, who was president and chairman of the club, played an integral role in choosing not to repair the dam. The collapse of the South Fork Dam raises questions still pertinent today. We need only think of Hurricane Katrina, where levees were inadequately designed and poorly maintained to save money. Both the flooding of Johnstown and of New Orleans could have been prevented with proper maintenance. The Johnstown flood occurred due to abused rights and breached responsibilities. This year, the 125th anniversary of the flood, we must consider the struggle between ownership rights and civic responsibilities. While personal liberty is essential to democracy, there is a point where this principle needs to be balanced with moral and legal obligations to our fellow citizens. The notion that something is strictly private, or that society has no prerogative to set limitations upon us, is dangerous and detrimental to not only individual communities like Johnstown, but to democratic society itself.